All right, there we go. Perfect. Hi, everybody. Richard Nickel with Pittsburgh Modular Synthesizers. Today, I'm going to walk through the Voltage Lab, maybe go through the demo that I gave at Super Booth a few times, with the idea that I could do it a little bit slower here and a little bit more in depth than you can in the sort of context of Super Booth. So let me know if you can hear me over the instrument or if one thing is too loud or whatnot, because I can adjust the levels and all that stuff. I have gotten some sleep since Super Booth, not a ton, probably need some more sleep, but that's all right. There's a lot to do. My leg is really sore, but it's healing. And you just, when you have a broken leg, you just kind of deal with a broken leg. It'll come along. Oh, this stream, I am going to leave this stream up. I'm going to leave it up. The reason I was deleting it before was I was kind of sneak peeking the instrument, and I didn't want to leave sort of my practice runs up. But now that the world knows what it is and what's going on, there's no reason for me to get rid of these things. So I'll leave it up so everyone can watch and everyone can sort of take the in-depth walkthrough in their own time, because obviously not everyone can watch this at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. As I'm going along, I think there's a bit of a delay. I know there's a bit of a delay. So post your comments and I will answer as many questions as possible. If your question sort of scrolls by and I don't answer it, just ask it again and I will answer it then. Unless I just don't have an answer, in which case I'll probably tell you that. B-Boy Tech Reports here. That's awesome. I didn't see you at Super Booth. If you didn't go, you missed a good one. You should try to come next year. It's super, super fun. There's a ton of cool gear this year. WY, thank you for buying the full system through the Kickstarter. That's freaking awesome. And if you're watching this later on, you bought one of our systems for the Kickstarter, or really any of our gear in general, we really, really appreciate it. That's super cool. I don't know if I'm going to get into the organic animal sounds today, but what I'm going to do, there'll be some of that stuff in the manual, and for the manual I'm going to not only write out the patches for the manual, but I'm also going to do a YouTube video describing each patch and sort of why it does what it does. That way, as you're patching along, you can sort of understand why I made the decisions I made for the not presets, but for the patches in the manual. And then maybe you can glean a little bit more information than just copying what's in the manual. Today, I'm really just going to sort of go through the Voltage Lab section by section and explain sort of in broad strokes and minor details what's going on. So unless someone tells me in the comments that they either can't hear me or can't hear the synth, then I will get started. So the first section of the synthesizer, on the full left-hand side here, is the MIDI and the arpeggiator. I don't have the MIDI and the arpeggiator patched in right now. I don't have a keyboard or a DAW attached to it. But basically, it gives you full assignable pitch to the secondary oscillator. The primary oscillator is always attached to the pitch of the MIDI. So if you have a keyboard attached or a DAW, primary oscillator is always going to get the MIDI note, but you can assign that to the secondary oscillator as well. The MIDI gate can be assigned to the function generators independently, so by holding edit you can turn on function generator A, function generator B. You can also send the gate to the dynamics controllers, turn it on and off. So the idea is that there was no reason to have to patch the MIDI. It's sort of internally routed. If you want to use it, you can turn it on for each module, and if not, you just leave it off and you can use MIDI where you want it, when you want it, or not at all. If you're not using a keyboard or anything, there's some randomness that you can generate with the MIDI module. You can create random arpeggiations that create a sequence, sort of a up to 16-note sequence that is then randomized or just played back in the order. You can also create a completely random sequence and just use that. So even if you're not using MIDI or the arpeggiator section for performing with a keyboard or with a DAW, you can still use it as a random generator for both gates and CVs. That is the MIDI module. The primary oscillator, maybe move the camera a little bit. There we go. The primary oscillator and the secondary oscillator are essentially our idea of sort of a West Coast complex oscillator, but we really decided to create our own kind of vibe with it. This whole synthesizer really is, it's not really based on any particular instrument. It's definitely inspired by quite a bit out there on both the West Coast style and the East Coast style. The primary oscillator in the Voltage Lab is quite a bit different than the Lifeform's primary oscillator module. Although the Lifeform's primary oscillator module was kind of the beginning of this whole process for us, and it really was the spark of the idea that led to this instrument. What I mean by that is the idea of chaining wave folders together. So you start with a waveform, whether it be a sine or a saw or a square or whatever, and then you run that through several wave shapers, not just one, to create increasingly complex waveforms. And that was sort of the spark of the Lifeform's primary oscillator module, and I think that's what really gives it a unique voice and a really unique sound. And the oscillator in this system is really built off of that idea. With this oscillator, it's certainly the most complex from an engineering standpoint that we've ever designed, for reasons that I'll get into here in a minute. But it was also really designed to work within this system. So we made sure that the features that it had worked with and complemented the other modules in the system. So the primary oscillator in the Voltage Lab, you have your frequency and fine-tune controls. You have your waveform selection, and you can see we have sine, triangle, saw, and square. We call those the seed waves. And the reason we call them the seed waves is because the waveforms are going through so many wave shapers before they get to the output that you never really see the raw geometric shapes. There's always going to be a little bit of wave shaping happening on them. Now a sine still sounds like a sine, and a triangle still sounds like a triangle. They all kind of sound like they're supposed to sound, but you're never going to get those super sharp shapes just because of the signal path that they have to go through. Each waveform also has a warp version of the wave. Now this is the circuit in here that we're really extremely proud of. And if you did see the demo at Super Booth that I was giving, I had boiled down the demo of this instrument to about 45 seconds. And that was really just showing off this warp function and the power that it gives us as far as wave shaping goes. But what it allows us to do is it allows us to shape the unshapeable waves. And what that means is waveforms with high harmonic content like square waves and saw waves that previously didn't give you a whole lot or anything at all through a wave shaper now really come to life, and you get a ton of additional harmonic content out of it. So I definitely want to demonstrate this. But I'm going to walk through the rest of the primary oscillator first, and then we'll go back. I'll rip out this patch, and we'll go back and we'll listen to some sounds. The wave folder itself has 3 controls. You have asymmetry, access, and timbre. The asymmetry and the access, again, are additional wave shapers that happen before the actual wave folding. And what that is allowing us to do is sort of position the wave and prep the wave so that it hits the wave folder slightly differently. So as you hit that wave folder in different ways, you're going to get different responses from it. So we wanted to be able to get as much out of that wave folder as we could, so we added a couple additional wave shapers. So at this point we've gone through 3 wave shapers before the wave folder. The timbre control is the actual wave folder itself. This is a new wave folder for us. We haven't used this design in the past. This is something Michael's been working on for a while. I think sounds really, really smooth and really, really good. Definitely a different vibe than you get from, say, the wave folder that we have in the microvolt, or even the one in the double helix. The microvolt and the double helix share the same wave folding circuits. This one is a completely different circuit. On the row of LEDs on the right-hand side here, these are your modulation destinations. Now, I should say before that, asymmetry, access, and timbre all have dedicated CV inputs. They can all be modulated independently. And then there's a 4th modulation input for the primary oscillator that can be assigned. And that can be assigned to linear FM, wave switching, where it'll cycle through the different waveforms, amplitude modulation, so there's a VCA built in, and ring modulation. And again, there's a full analog ring modulator built into the core of the primary oscillator circuit. The secondary oscillator has a much simpler oscillator where we have a basic coarse and fine tune, then we have a sine wave output, or that can be changed to an alpha wave. And an alpha wave, what we went with was a triangle to a square. So you have fewer harmonics to higher harmonics, and that control is voltage controllable. We also have a hard sync to 2. So oscillator 2, the secondary oscillator, will hard sync to the primary oscillator. And that creates some interesting effects when you start using the secondary oscillator as a modulation source for FM or ring mod. Is there enough room for patch cables between the upper and lower modules? Yes, there's. The piece of, you can't see it with the camera where it is right now, but there's the piece of wood between the two modules leaves enough distance, so there's definitely room for the patch cables. And the way the patch cables sort of stick out, they hang over the keyboard, but they don't actually ever sort of flop down on it. So the keyboard is definitely usable as well. So now that we have, I've sort of walked through the features of the primary side, I'm going to pull all this out and patch up and listen to just the oscillator itself. This is a demo that I gave at Superbooth, I don't know, probably every 4 minutes for 3 days. It's if you have, we would, every time we played it, every time we did the demo, we would turn it up louder and louder and louder, which probably drove the people around us crazy, but we got a big kick out of it, and I feel like that should count for something. The sort of across the hallway from us, Radical Technologies had a booth, and every time we would do the demo, he would turn around, give me a big smile, and then crank his up as loud as he would go as well. So that was always super fun. So we're going to start with, let's kind of get rid of everything here. We're going to start with a square wave here. And now this is just a simple square wave. And square wave sounds great, super high harmonic content, but the problem is, when you run square wave through a wave folder, it just cancels itself out. You can see as I cycle through the timbre, there's nothing there to grab onto. It's just zeroing itself out. You can find a spot where there's basically no signal at all. And that's the problem that Michael and I set out to solve. And when I say Michael and I mean Michael, I was just excited to hear the results. So what we developed was a circuit that allows us to retain the harmonic content and retain the sound of the waveform, but sort of squash it in a way that allows the wave folder something to grab onto. So we go back to our square wave, and we'll open it wide open here. And you can see nothing there, but if I turn on the warp circuit now, I don't know how well this will come across over YouTube, but there is endless bottom end on this. And this works with any high harmonic wave. So if we switch now to a saw wave, the saw gives you a little bit more in a wave folder. This is without the warp circuit on. It's still not, it sounds kind of flat and a little bit dull. So if we enable the warp circuit again, huge sound out of that. We add some frequency modulation. The frequency modulation is linear, so we're using the secondary oscillator here to modulate the primary oscillator. You can just hear the crazy amounts of harmonics we have available to us. So that is the warp circuit, a little bit of FM added. And we can take a look now at some of the other modulation options available to the primary oscillator. So I'm going to patch in one of the function generators here. We'll switch to the wave cycling. So we're using the CV input to modulate the selected wave. We could also, if we wanted, instead of using the function generation LFO here, we could just patch in the random CV. It'll randomly jump around. Take that out. The output of the secondary oscillator is normal to the modulation input. So now we'll jump to amplitude modulation. Now we're using the alpha wave triangle to modulate the amplitude of the primary oscillator. And we can switch to ring mod now. Ring mod with hard sync. First time I heard this, I couldn't believe it, that I had missed this for so long. So that's the ring modulation between the two. Of course, we could use the sine wave or both. Now, in addition to the 4 modulations, you can also use FM with the other 3. So if we select FM and waveform here, we can use both of those at the same time. Or FM and amplitude modulation. Or we can use FM and ring mod at the same time. There's no comb filter. But it does give you that effect. So there's no, within the Voltage Lab Voice itself, there's no random section. So there's no area dedicated to this is where we manage the random or chaotic modulation, the CV and gates. But what we've done is we've mostly due to space constraints, we've sort of sprinkled it throughout the unit. So if I just shift that up for a second here. Down here we have a random CV output and a random gate output. And if I patch this into the pitch, hear the random pitch changes. Now, this random, I will patch a gate signal here too using the random gate. Now we're just going to pluck our low pass gates. But this random, it's not a completely random circuit. What it is a 6-stage shift register. And what that means is it's sort of a 6-step sequencer that sort of continually cycles through. Each time it gets to one of the stages, there's a chance that that stage is going to change. So in the pitch side, there's a chance that it'll stay the same. There's also a chance that it may change. And then there's also a chance that it's going to end up being a rest, where there's no pitch and no gate information. So as it's cycling through, what you get instead of a completely random output, you get sort of a evolving random, where you have this very musical pattern where it sounds almost like a sequence, but it keeps changing just enough that it always sounds like it's moving. Down here in this section as well, we have an analog sample and hold, an analog noise source. So you have an additional source of random as well. The noise is normal to the sample and hold. The clock from the MIDI is also normaled to the sample and hold. So just by using the sample and hold output, you do get a completely random voltage. The clock of the random that we're listening to now, the 6-stage shift register, is also tied to the MIDI and the arpeggiator clock. Now that clock is up here, it's a tap tempo clock. That can also be switched to use with a MIDI clock or an external gate. So you could use a gate from anywhere to clock that. The enveloping functions, we will get to that in just a minute. You are late. Yes, you are. But this will be archived, so if you want to go back and watch me do this from the beginning, you can do that. I'm not going to delete them going forward. I was deleting them before because, again, I was sort of practicing for Superbooth, and it was really for me. It was then became a sneak peek for everyone that was, wanted to watch, and that was fantastic because you guys asked a lot of questions that then I was asked at Superbooth, so I knew how to keep an eye on what the answers would be. How can you patch this into a broken leg? Just slip on the stairs. No, don't do that. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. I was in a wheelchair for 2.5 months. It was just terrible. So don't break your leg. I wouldn't even recommend telling anyone to break a leg, sort of even in a good luck context, because breaking your leg is just, it's terrible. But anyway, back to the instrument. So that covers the complex oscillator section. So we can move on now to the function generators, which up to this point we really only used one of them briefly for an LFO. Perry, was that you? Perfect. I didn't actually have a cast. The way I broke my leg, they didn't actually give me a cast. I had a boot that I could remove, which was fantastic because I could scratch my leg. I can't imagine how bad it would have been if I had a cast on as well. But anyway, enough about that. We can talk about something much more interesting. So what we use first is talk about the function generators. There's 2 function generators, and these function generators they could be used for several different things. This circuit at its core is really based off of the surge dual slope generator. There's been a lot of modern implementations of this in Eurorack formats and in other formats. The most popular, obviously, the Make Noise Maths is an implementation of this circuit, but there's countless versions of this circuit out there that are sort of successful to varying degrees at sort of paying homage to the original, but then adding a little bit more to it. Ours is a relatively straight up implementation. We do have a few extra little tricks up our sleeve, but it's a case of it's a really good circuit and it's a really good idea, and it really is one of those circuits that's kind of the heart of the West Coast synthesis and the sort of more experimental synthesis. And so we didn't want to go too far or do something too out there and lose that. So we really did focus on, with this circuit, just adding a little bit more and making it, giving it a little bit more that we could use within the context of the Voltage Lab. I haven't, as far as how fast and how slow they will go, I haven't measured them yet. We are still, we've gone through this synthesizer top to bottom. I don't know. It seems like every day we're adjusting something and tweaking something and changing a resistor value here and a resistor value there. So we don't have any finalized numbers on things like that. It goes into, if we listen to this one, I'll take this out, we'll listen to the output. So it goes into the low audio range is in its fastest. And in its slowest, some of the stuff I've been doing, I've had it up to 8 or 10 minutes. But again, I haven't sat down and clocked it yet because again, it could change. And I didn't want to, I don't want to be limited by something that I said and then in the end is not right. But this is probably as fast as it's going to go. That I'm fairly certain of. Sorry, I keep bumping the camera here. So the function generators themselves, you have a rise side and a fall side. This one, we have it in cycle mode, so essentially we're drawing the LFO with the function generator. This would be the left side of the waveform. This would be the right side. I guess I could put this on the scope so you could actually see what I'm doing here. And we'll just take this. We'll just take it straight through. I don't think the oscilloscope that I'm using can be adjusted in a way that's really going to make this terribly visually interesting. But essentially, you can change the shape of the waveform by adjusting the rise or the fall. If you keep them even, you're going to have that triangle wave. And as you change it, you're going to go anywhere from a saw to a triangle to a ramp. You can change the curve or the response curve from logarithmic to linear to exponential. Logarithmic is going to be nice and tight, faster response. Linear should be flat on both sides, and then exponential is going to be a much slower curve. Because all your energy is sort of changing at the end, where over here all your energy is sort of happening at the beginning. So this circuit, sort of as Serge designed it, is actually relatively fascinating on the circuit standpoint, but from a user standpoint, it's great because just gives you so many options. Right now we're using it as an LFO. Obviously we have voltage control over the rise, the fall, and both, and those are attenuverters, so you can adjust both in either positive or negative directions. We could use it as an envelope using the sustain. I could patch something in here to show this. We'll just come out of a gate here. So in sustain mode, we can trigger it, and I'm just triggering it, use the touch controller here. We can take the output then to control our low pass gates. And in sustain mode, as long as I hold the touchpad down, the function generator is going to remain open. As soon as I let go of it, it'll trigger the fall. So if I increase the rise and increase the fall, when I touch the touchpad, it'll cycle through the rise, and when I let go, then it'll cycle through the fall. And while I hold it, it'll sustain. Trigger mode functions a little bit differently, which it's just going to give us, doesn't matter how long I hold down the touch controller, all we're going to do is get a trigger out of it. Now we can shape that trigger using the rise and fall then. But again, it's really just an attack decay response. Whereas when sustain is on, you get the attack sustain release response of an envelope. When you're in trigger mode as well, the rise stage has to complete fully every time. So if we turn our rise stage up for much longer rise, during that rise stage, it doesn't matter how many times I touch the controller, it's going to complete the rise. Now, it will re-trigger on the fall, but the fall doesn't need to be completed before it re-triggers, but the rise does. In sustain mode, that's not the case. In sustain mode, you can re-trigger it in the rise and the fall as many times as possible. Now, as far as the blue LEDs go, I assure you, and we asked a lot of people about this at Super Booth, cameras accentuate the brightness of the LEDs a ton. The LEDs in real life are the same color or the same brightness as the yellow and the red ones on here. We've been working with these for a long time. I understand people's concerns. I think they look good. They're definitely not too bright in person, but when you have a camera jammed up to them, for some reason cameras grab on to that frequency and it just takes over. So again, I did ask a bunch of people about this at Super Booth because I know in the comments of some of the forums and whatnot, there was a lot of people bringing it up right away. But they are, as far as blue LEDs go, they're definitely on the dimmer side. Can you audio rate clock the function generator? Yes, you can, because it's all analog. You can audio rate clock pretty much everything except the MIDI and arpeggiator. But you could definitely trigger the function generator with an audio source, and we could take the secondary oscillator here. And trigger it In sustain mode, if you pass a CV through it, you can use it as a slew. So if you want a smooth random voltage, or you just want to smooth out a voltage, you can certainly do that. It doesn't have to just be gates that pass through. I've attempted to use it sort of as a terrible filter, and it seems to make a nice terrible filter. What you end up with is a half rectified waveform. So filter is probably not the right word, but you definitely get an effect out of it. You do, because it's positive only, so the waveform it's just going to lop the bottom half of the waveform off and do a little bit of slewing to it, so you do get this sort of strange half rectified wave out of it. The two function generators are controlled or connected by three different unison modes. So if you're triggering, and we'll trigger using just a random gate here. If you're triggering the first function generator, you can trigger the second one at the same time by using the 0 degrees, and that's just going to use the incoming trigger is also going to trigger the second function generator. It's a nice way to save batch cables and use one input to trigger both function generators, giving you two different envelopes out. At 90 degrees, we're triggering the second function generator at the end of the rise stage. So you can see when the rise completes, it does trigger the second function generator. And 180 degrees is triggering at the end of the cycle. So it would be the end of the fall, then triggers the function generator. Now, if you have the first function generator cycling, 0 and 180 after the first initial trigger are going to be the same. But if you're using it, if you're simply just triggering the first function generator, it does create a different event. Now you can do 0 degrees, 90 degrees, and 180, or any combination of them. So you could do 0 and 90, 90 and 180, 0 and 180, or all three if you want. So you can get some really interesting combinations there. There are some logical outputs too between the two function generators. We have an analog OR and what we're calling a contrast output. The analog OR simply gives you the output of the function generator with the highest voltage at any given moment. So if function generator 1's at 3 volts and function generator 2 is outputting 4 volts at that point, the OR output will output the 4 volts. And as soon as they flip-flop and function generator A is higher, it will output that one instead. The contrast output is going to give you the difference between the two function generators. Now, we could have put difference on the panel, but it didn't fit. So we decided contrast was a good word. An example of that would be if the function generator A is outputting 3 volts and function generator B is outputting 1 volt, then the contrast output would be 2 volts because it would be the difference between the two. Those voltages are actually nice as well because they give you, again, those voltages aren't random, but they are definitely chaotic, and they do jump around quite a bit. So you get these patterned chaos that you can use for modulation of anything in the system. The total power consumption of this thing, the power consumption of this module is a lot. The positive draw is on just the Voltage Lab is 525 milliamps. The negative side, I think, is 400, I want to say, milliamps. It doesn't use any 5-volt rail, but it just pulls a ton of power, because it's essentially, 8 or 10 or 12 modules worth of circuitry in there. So to power this would be batteries. You would need a lot of batteries, a really big battery. The touch controller is not too bad on power consumption, but the Voltage Lab definitely is. In the next day or two, I will have the web pages up for the modules, and that has all the information. The web pages have all that information, and the web pages obviously go into much clearer detail as to what each function is and how it works. All right. Well, if you that battery will be just fine. That's a big battery. Jeez. Moving on to the dynamics controllers. Now, this is another circuit in here that we're really proud of, and this one we've been working on for a long time. There's been iterations of it in modules, and in a microvolt there was a version of it, but we really feel like this is the definitive version, the most complete version that we've come up with, and certainly it really speaks to this system, and it really it was modified and designed in a way so that it works really well within the Voltage Lab. Now, the dynamics controllers, what they are is they're low-pass gate modules. And what we've done with them is, if you're not familiar with a low-pass gate module, it's a low-pass gate. It's a circuit developed by Don Buchla that switches between several different modes. You have a VCA mode, and you have a filter mode, which would be a 2-pole Salin key filter with a filter core similar to that of a MS-20. And then it has a third mode, which is called both mode, or low pass gate mode, in which you get characteristics from both the VCA and the filter. So as it opens up, it adds harmonics to the sound. As it closes, it removes harmonics from the sound. So you have a very natural sounding way of controlling the signal. We are huge fans of low-pass gates. We did what I think is a fantastic low-pass gate module in your rack. But the problem with low-pass gate modules is they use Vactrols. And oh, nice! You see, they weren't too bright. Sorry, I got distracted. The low-pass gate uses something called a Vactrol, and as sort of the heart of the circuit, and essentially, in effect, it acts as a voltage-controlled resistor. Now, the Vactrols have this sort of magical quality that give you this beautiful response decay out of it, where you have a very sharp attack, but then you have this nice sort of very organic decay, and that's where you get that sort of Buchla bongo sound out of, that nice trail that you have. The problem with Vactrols are they're wildly different from one to another. So you might get a module that has a Vactrol with a very short decay, and it sounds very plucky. Or you might get a Vactrol that has a very long decay, and it kind of sounds tubby. And they're both interesting, but you don't know what you're buying, and you don't really know what you're getting. And from a designer standpoint and from a manufacturer standpoint, we run into the problem where I can't guarantee that my customers, when they order something, are going to get what they expect, because they may want a short one, they get a long one, they may want a long one, they get a short one. So what we did was, a few years ago, we sat down, and Michael I sort of tasked Michael with the idea of, well, what if we engineered around the low-pass gate? What if we said, let's take that beautiful response curve that we get and let's use the whole low-pass gate circuit, but let's just take the Vactrol component out and replace that with some analog circuitry that emulates it. And it took him about 9 months to do it, but at one point I got a call late in the evening. He was just thrilled that he was able to do this. It was a hard challenge, but he really knocked it out of the park. So what we have is a circuit that gives you the same response as this Vactrol does and the same feel as the low-pass gate, but it's fully controllable. So we have a response control now that we can dial in the Vactrol. So if you want a very short and plucky Vactrol, you can have that. If you want a longer response, you can have that as well. We'll go back to this random here. So if we want a nice short plucky, now this is in filter mode, we can go to our VCA mode here. VCA mode, you really don't get the Vactrol response. You can hear it a touch in there. But you get that real nice sharp pluckiness when you hit it with a gate. Now we're just taking the gate out. We could run the gate through our function generator here. Make that relatively short. And so that's the VCA. You're not getting the timbre changes, but you are, or the harmonic changes, but you are getting a really nice plucky sound. Very short, very long, and you can dial it up anywhere in between. And of course, what we've added in this version of the dynamics controller that we haven't had in the previous versions, mostly because it was a really hard problem to solve, is you can now voltage control this. So you can voltage control essentially what Vactrol is in your low-pass gate. So we'll take this first function generator and use that to modulate. So now essentially what we're doing is modulating the length of the Vactrol. In our low-pass gate circuit. So right away, you add that extra dimension to the sound, and it really, really opens it up. So let's switch now to the filter mode. We'll take out the voltage control for a moment. So right now we're just using the filter mode. We can enable a pluck, which allows us to pluck that Vactrol circuit. You can hear it gets a little snappier there. This again, we can dial in the response we're looking for. In this module, we've also added a completely new resonance circuit. We didn't use resonance. We didn't use the filter mode, for that matter, in the microvolt. And the dynamic filter module that we did, we used a different resonance circuit that just, it would go a little out of control. We thought for the Eurorack module, that's great. But for this system, we wanted to dial it back just a little bit and try to get as close as we could to the edge without letting it go over. The problem with a low-pass gate circuit and the filter and adding resonance to it is the sound key filter cord doesn't have a natural bandpass filter out. So what that means is there's no natural resonance really available to you. Typically in a filter you find the bandpass, you loop that back through, and that's going to be your resonance, and then you just adjust the level. In a low-pass gate, that's not there, so you have to do a little bit of trickery to get a resonance out of it, and usually the resonance ends up being nothing, crazy out of control resonance. There's no soft knee, so to speak. It's sort of nothing and then everything. So dialing in and finding and then being able to play right at that knee was a tough engineering challenge, but I think the end result, I think it sounds really, really good. We can add some of the envelope back in. Or add that voltage control over the response again. And these are some sounds that you can't get it with another instrument. This is, we're running the saw wave through the warp circuit, and we're voltage controlling the back drum. So this is something you really can't do with anything else. And this is just a very basic patch, but I think it shows you the unique voice that this instrument has. So we can switch now to low-pass gate mode. You can see this is very sharp and plucky. This is just the function generator opening and closing now. In this part we are getting both the VCA functionality and the filter functionality. So we'll add our pluck to it here. And this one is very nice and sharp. Dial in some of that CV over the response. That's funny. You cracked me up too. It is a lab. It's Michael and I have always prided ourselves on being able to take complex synthesis ideas and creating an instrument that makes it easier to get involved with. And I think the SV1 Black Box is a great example of that. An instrument that has near infinite possibilities as far as getting really deep sounds out of it, but by default, it's very easy to sort of jump in and get going. This instrument is a little bit different. It's not normaled, so there's no sort of starting point. You can't just plug in an output and get a sound of it. You do need to patch it. But we felt there's no natural way to patch this instrument, so it really seemed to us like the best thing to do was to leave it fully open and let people really dig in and discover it. So Voltage Research Laboratory really, I think, is the best name that we could give this instrument because it really describes what we were trying to achieve and what we were trying to offer musicians. Now that said, it will come with a very detailed manual that walks you through each section of the instrument, and we'll also have a lot of different patch examples that'll be available as well, so that when you do get it, you're not sort of left on your own. You can go through the patch examples and read through the manual. If you have a question about the patch example, I'm going to do a YouTube video for each patch example in it, sort of explaining the process and why, to get the results, I made the decisions I made, to hopefully allow people to understand a little bit more fully how the instrument works and get them up and running on it as quickly as possible so they can start making their own weird sounds. The manual will be released online. It's just going to PDF. We're not going to cut down any trees to ship some manuals. And that also allows us to add to it as over time or fix the inevitable spelling mistakes. But it will be downloadable and it should be available, I don't know, in a month or so. So we have two dynamics controllers. Something I haven't talked about too much is or at all, to be honest, is the balance input. So you can see down here this control. This gives you, right now I'm going into input number 2, so I've been using it as a gain control. But you can patch a second signal in here and use it as a fader, so you can fade between the two. So if we start with our signal here, we can patch the second oscillator into 1, and then it's a mixer. So each of the dynamics controllers have these balance inputs, and then there's also a dynamics A plus dynamics B output, so you can mix the outputs of the two dynamics controllers. Take this out. So now the last section of the panel here is our analog delay. If I patch the output of our dynamics controller to the input of the analog delay, what we have is a fully analog Buckner Brigade analog delay, which I think sounds pretty darn good. It will self-oscillate. This circuit is based on the analog replicator that Michael developed. But in this amount of space, we had to slim it down quite a bit and sort of focus on what we thought made sense within this system. So we have an attenuverter CV input to modulate the delay. So we're using that now to modulate the delay time. And we also made sure that it's nice and clean and nice and bright sounding. So this will give you up to about a little over 1/3 of a second of delay. It uses two 4096 BBD chips. I don't know the MS-20 high-pass bass boost trick. The low-pass gate in here is only a low-pass filter. There's no high-pass output. So that's the complete walkthrough of the Lifeorb's Voltage Lab, sort of half of the Voltage Research Laboratory. Now that I've been doing this for well over an hour, I think I'm going to stop for today and probably tomorrow pick up and talk about the touch controller. So if you want to learn about the touch controller, you can either watch the live stream tomorrow, or I will be saving it so you can watch it at a later time, but it will be available. If you have any questions, you're certainly welcome to email me, richard@pittsburghmodular.com. I'm happy to email any questions, or if you have a topic you want me to cover in one of these videos. I'm going to do my best to be online as much as possible so people can interact with me and can ask me questions and hopefully get the most out of this instrument, or really any of the Pittsburgh Modular instruments. If you have a question about the SV1 or the Microvolt or one of our Eurorack modules, I'm certainly happy to talk about that or give a demo on that stuff as well. But again, thanks you guys all for watching, and for everyone who has backed our Kickstarter campaign, and for everyone who has purchased any Pittsburgh Modular ever. We sincerely appreciate it. It allows us to keep doing what we are deeply passionate about, and it makes every day feel like fun and not work. So again, thank you guys very much. I will be back in a day or so to talk about the touch controller, but until then, talk to you later.